All right, so 4.6 is just a little bit something different on this one. We're still going to solve, but this time we're going to solve by square roots. Okay, so it's going to kind of have the setup like it did for factoring. But this time we're going to kind of go the different parts of this. And here's the biggest thing for this part when we're solving by square roots. You're going to use this when there is no b term. So this is going to be kind of like when we did the difference of two perfect squares, but in this case you may not have exactly perfect square numbers. So when we're going through the ax squared plus bx plus c, it may look something like this, but now the b term is going to be gone. So now you're just going to have an x squared term and then just some number. So that's the biggest difference that you got here. Now again, the thing is, with that b term being gone, it may look like a perfect square, but it may also not quite look like a perfect square. And for this one, here's the steps you're going to kind of go through when you're going through these. Okay, really it's only 2 steps when it comes down to it. When they ask you to solve by square roots, you're going to get the x squared term by itself on one side of the equation. Okay, so if there's something multiplied by the x squared term, you'll get rid of that. If there's something added to it, you'll get rid of that, so that you get to the end where you only have x squared equals some number. That's all we're looking for. And then here's where it's really easy. You're just going to square root both sides. So this is where you're going to get to use your calculator. That's it. So you're going to add or subtract everything away from the x squared term. Once you've got x squared equals something, you square root both sides, and then you're good to go. Okay, now one small thing on this one. One little trick question here. If you have x squared equal to a negative, then you're going to have no real solution. That if you're to check, if you had your calculator and we got it to the point where we had x squared equals some number that was negative. Let's say it was x squared equals negative 9. That you may go, well, 9 is 3 times 3, so we can answer there. Okay, but here's what we're going to do. Let's just say you had something like this, that if we square root both sides, so we're going to take the square root of x squared, we're going to take the square root of negative 9. If you square root of negative 9, I'll show that to you here on the screen. We've got our square root, we put in the negative 9. Calculator's going to tell you, okay, there's an error here, which means same thing. That if you get an error message, that means there's no solution. So when we square root this, when we get it down to this part, it doesn't matter what you do. If that's a negative 9 right here, then basically you can just cross it out and say, okay, this thing is a no solution. Okay, now, and for this part, right now, we're going to say that it's no real solution. Later on, a couple of sections down the road, we're going to talk about a complex or an imaginary solution, which is a little different, but we'll talk about that when we get there. So if you do happen to get that right now in section 6, if you get x squared equals a negative number, you can just stop and say, all right, there's no real solution for this thing. They might sneak one of those in, but I think most of the time you're going to be dealing with whole numbers that you actually can square root, so that's just one little option you got there at the end just to be careful of. Okay, here we go. Just go through a few examples here and show you what we've got. All right, so very first one. Again, they'll start with the directions by saying solve by using square roots. So we've got 2x squared equals 50. Very first step we said back up here at the top was you've got to take both sides, or you get x squared by itself on one side. So if you've got 2x squared, only one thing to do. Just divide both sides by 2. So if we're dividing both sides by 2, now you've got x squared equals 25. So then you just square root both sides. Okay, when you square root these, whenever you square root, when we start off with x squared, we're looking for 2 answers, right? If we did square root of 25, that would just be 5, and now we've only got 1 answer. To get the second answer, we could have a positive 5, or it could be a negative 5. So because we're starting off with x squared, we're still looking for 2 answers, and anytime you square root, you have to realize that you could have started out. Basically, if you'd done this in reverse, you could have done negative 5 times negative 5 to get a positive 25. So anytime we're doing these and we've got x squared, if we've just got the 1 answer, we'll put the minus underneath it there. Now, if we're doing a test, I'm okay with that. For the online homework answer, I don't think they've added that. Sometimes they give you the plus or minus button that's here. You're probably going to have to put 5 and then comma negative 5. So you have to separate the 2 answers by a comma. Okay, let's give you another one that's pretty short here. Let's say you've got x squared minus 81 equals 0. Okay, again, if they tell you to solve by square roots, you've got to get the x squared by itself, so the first thing you would do is add 81 to both sides. Okay, now you've got the x squared by itself. There's nothing multiplied with it. So now we can just take the square root of both sides. Okay, if we squared 81, that would be 9. But again, because we start off with x squared, we need 2 answers. So to get 81, you could do 9 times 9. You could also do negative 9 times negative 9. So we're going to put the plus or minus there. And if somebody's saying, well, we're going to have to do the plus or minus every single time. Yes, if we're going to do solve by square roots, when you square root these, you're always going to consider that that answer could be positive, or it could be, because we could do a negative 9 times a negative 9 and still get a positive 81. And again, that's basically that same thing of if we start with x squared, we need 2 answers. So we can use the positive or the negative and get those 2 answers. Okay, so let's go with 3x squared minus 63 equals 0. Okay, and again, we're still trying to get x squared by itself, so we would still do like our normal solving. First thing is that we'd add 63 to both sides. So that gets us down to 3x squared equals 63. Okay, and from there, just got to divide both sides by 3. And doing that to the right-hand side, that's going to get us to 21. And again, now that the x squared is by itself, we're going to square root both sides. Okay, if you check the square root of 21, it does not come out to be a perfect number. It comes out to get a decimal number. It's going to be, in this case, if we square root 21 here, we get like 4.58. And probably in most cases, they're going to ask you to leave it in the simplest radical form, which means if you get a decimal number, you've got to basically try to look and break it down. You've got to find some different things here. If you start breaking down 21, it only breaks as 3 times 7, so there's no perfect square numbers there. So if you square root 21, that's about all you can do. So now we're going to say that x would equal either plus or minus square root of 21. Some of the answers, they might ask for a decimal answer. If they ask for a decimal answer, if we took 4.58257, they may tell you to go to 3 decimal places or sometimes 2. If we went to 3 decimal places, it would be 4.58. The 5 would round that up to a 3. Again, still the plus or minus there. So I think most of the time they're going to go here. It may be one of those things where sometimes we'll ask for this answer here and have you go one more step here. All right, here's where we'll kind of go back and do one quick review just to make sure we've got a couple of things here. Let's say that last number, instead of being 21, let's say it just had been 20. So let's say you had x squared equals 20. Okay, x squared is by itself. We've got the 20 there, so we'd have to square root both sides. Okay, if we check 20, it's not a perfect square root number. It's going to be a little bit less than 4.583. But here's where you have to kind of break it down. So if you've got 20, what's options we can do to break it down? Do 2 times 10 or 4 times 5, right? If we do 4 times 5, 4 is a perfect square root number, right? So if we were taking the square root of 20 and trying to break it down, 20, if we write it as 4 times 5, well, the square root of 4 is 2, and 5 is about as far as you can go with that because it's a prime number, so that would make it 2 square root of 5. So if you get a number that you, and again, we did try the 21, it would only do 3 times 7, so there were no perfect square root numbers. If you get the 20 and start breaking it down, well, here's 4 times 5. There's a perfect square root, so if we can do square root of 4 and make it 2, you can simplify this thing down to 2 square root of 5. So if they ask you for simplest radical form, sometimes you can just leave it as the number if you're not able to break it down. But if you have a number you can break down, break it down as much as you can. And again, if you're not good with doing those numbers, if you've got 20, that's where we said always start with your smaller numbers like your 2's and your 3's. 20 you can make it 2 times 10. 10 you can make it 2 times 5. So if you wrote those prime numbers together, you've got a 2, 2, and 5. And you're looking for pairs, so there's a pair of 2's. So that's where you can take that 2 on the outside and that 5 stays on the inside. Okay, so there's where, again, where we're kind of going back to some of the earlier chapters and making you go back and do your square roots and do things with it. So some of those questions you'll still have to kind of go back and pull some different simplifying parts back from earlier chapters that we had. Okay, and then the last thing we'll do out of section 6. So that's where they're going to ask you to solve by factoring. The next thing they're going to ask you to do is they're going to ask you to do completing the square. We're going to do just the short version of completing the square because some parts ask you to solve by completing the square, but there's an easier way. So, not even going to show you that one. I'm just going to show you the setup on it. So all we're going to do is just show you the setup, and then you can solve these any way that you want to solve them here. So this is where they're going to ask you to complete the square. Okay, and again, they're basically kind of getting you set up for a different option that I'll show you this one kind of on the side. It's one thing I'm not going to ask you to do on the test. I'm going to show it to you because there's an easier way to get the answer without having to memorize this part. So we're going to show you the other part for that one tomorrow. But here you go. Here's your couple of steps you need for this thing. First step you have to do is, when they give you x squared plus bx, and they're going to leave you a blank box for the c, basically like that, and they're going to say, all right, find out what this value is at the end of it. And that's kind of where they're going for this part. So these would be the steps you would do to go back and figure out what that c term would be to make this thing what they call a perfect square. Very first thing you're going to do is you're going to take the b term that you have and you're going to divide it by 2. So now you've got, whatever the b term is, you're going to basically make it a fraction. Most of the time that's going to simplify down. If that had been 8, it would have been 8 divided by 2, so now you have 4. Okay, and then the second thing you're going to do is you're going to square whatever this b over 2 number is. And once you square that number, that's the c term. That's the number you're looking for to put in this box right here. And that's it. That's all you have to do. Okay. Again, these will go pretty quick because you only have to do 2 things. So the answers go by pretty fast when we get through the setup. Okay, so you've got m squared plus 24m plus, and they'll give you an open box, an empty thing at the end. Sometimes they'll put a question mark in there, and they'll say, or sometimes they may even put c in here, and they'll ask you to go back and figure out what that missing value is. Okay, again, only 2 steps you have to do. Take the b term you have here and divide it by 2. 24 divided by 2 is 12. And then for step 2, you take that answer and then square it. That's 144. And that's the number that we're looking for that would go in that box right there. Okay, now here's why they call that completing the square. Just to kind of show you why they do that. That if we had put that number in here, if we'd taken that 144 and put it at the end, and then usually they would ask you to factor this thing. Guess what the factors of 144 are that's going to equal 24? It's going to be 12, right? So that basically if you go back and do this, it's going to be 12 and 12. But if you've got m plus 12 and m plus 12, we said if you've got the same thing twice, that's where you can just put m plus 12 squared. So that's why they call it completing the square, that if you get that last number to be the right number that's here, you can rewrite this thing so it's some expression to the second power. And that's kind of what they're looking at doing, and then they're saying, all right, well, now that you've got this, now we can take the square root of both sides and kind of solve it like we were doing before. Now, sometimes it works really good for some parts of this one, sometimes it doesn't, so we're just going to kind of get the basics of it, and we're going to show you, I'll show you kind of just one little problem of here's how you would do it, but we'll show you a way tomorrow that's a lot easier that you can do this one every single time. This only works in certain cases, and if you add a term in front of the m squared, it makes it even tougher, so we're going to show you an option that no matter what it is, you can do this one the same way every single time, and it makes it a little bit easier when we're going through this. Okay, so for all we need is that number right there, so that would be the answer we're looking for, would be 144. Alright, so let's give you just a few more of those. Okay, so we'll go y squared minus 2y, and then plus, and then we've got our empty box at the end there. Alright, in this case, your b term is negative 2. So if we do b divided by 2, that's negative 2 divided by 2, which is negative 1. And again, once you've got this number, though, now you're going to take that number. Now, and again, when you do it, make sure you use the negative both times. It's negative 1 squared. So if we do negative 1 times negative 1, that would be a positive 1. So that would be the number we would have to go back and put in the box right there. Good. And same thing with you online. If you're doing these numbers in the homework, they should give you an empty box. They'll just give you a spot and tell you to go back and put the number in there. Just go back and put the 1 in. All right, 2 more. X squared minus 18x plus, and then we've got our empty box. All right, again, take the b term, divide it by 2. So that's a negative 18 divided by 2, which is negative 9. And then once you got that number, you just need to square it. That's our 81, and that's the 81 we would put in the box right there. Okay, and the last one we'll do, it's a worst case scenario. And you might get one of these in the homework, and it's one of those that it may look bad, but then when you actually take your time and kind of go through it, it's not as bad as you think it is. We've got x squared minus 9x plus, and then we've got our empty box here. Okay, same setup. You're still going to take your b term, which is negative 9 and divide it by 2. But then you're thinking, okay, that's a fraction. What do we do? Well, don't make it a mixed number. Just even though it's improper, just leave it as negative 9 over 2, and then take negative 9 over 2 and then square it and see what you get. You got negative 9 times negative 9, that's a positive 81, and then 2 times 2 is 4. And again, don't make it improper. You know, it's already improper. Don't make it into a mixed number. Just leave it like that, and it should be in simplest form. So that's the number that you have to put in the box right there. And that's okay that that's a fraction. It's still okay. And the only time you'll get a fraction answer here for your box is if this b term is odd. If it's odd, it's always going to be a fraction. If it's even, it's always going to simplify down to a whole number.